We're going to continue looking at the code that we have here, just going off a video from Skillsoft and taking what I learned from it and putting it here. So after running the previous code, we're going to be switching up a little bit. We can see that we have a lot of our imports commented out right here, and that's just because we're going to be using the org.springframework.context application context, and then we're going to use this one where we have the class pathway for our XML application. This allows us to load configurations from XML file in the class path. Now there's two sets of code. We're going to be doing this top one, and then we're going to be doing this bottom one right here. So for the first one, we initialize the application context by instantiating a class path XML application context. So we're getting the class path from here. So we have our application context, that's what we're using. We're making a new instance of it, we're calling it app context, and we're setting it equal to a new class path XML application context. This is where we're going to load the definitions from our given XML file. And our given XML file is the application context.xml. So that's what we're going to have for here as well. We can have more information about it if we just hover over it, but we need to pass in our XML file into our class path application and set it to our application context stored in app context. Now we need our IoT device. Our IoT device is the class that we've previously made. We've made all of this in the playlist link below the like button. The last one we talked about it. So we have our IoT device right here. It's basically getters, setters for air condition and temp sensor, which are strings. We are going to have this. It's called myDeviceBean, and we are casting our app context.getBean because we want to get the bean from our application context. We're passing this into here, the myIoT device bean, from our application context.getBean. We have to cast that as an IoT device, and now that's stored in myDeviceBean. And then we're going to print that out right here. So after running this code, which we'll do in a second, the application context is an extension of our bean factory, meaning it's a type of bean factory. So let's do another way we can look at this. We have our bean factory, just the bean factory. We're going to call it bean factory. We want to cast our application context, which is this right here, as a bean factory. So we have it casted, and we are going to be passing this in just like we did last time, and we're storing it inside of our bean factory. Now we have our IoT device. It's called myBean1 or myDeviceBean1. This is just basically what we have up here. The only difference is that instead of getting our application context, we're using our bean factory. That's literally the only difference. Now we can see that we are just going to print this out here the same way. I changed it to myDeviceBean1 so we don't get some kind of name conflict between this one right here. So we're gonna have both of these printing out. Again, it's basically the same thing. So this second one, we can see that there are more ways to load and configure beans in an application. Our application context is basically from our bean factory, so that's why it would work so well. Next, we're going to go into our IoT device, and inside of here, we are going to look at our private string device, private string description. We can see that these are hard-coded, but now we are going to take out this right here. Once these are taken out, we can now go about and actually input and set values for them. I forgot to run this, and I just did it when we removed these. So let's actually put these back. Let's go back to our main, and then we can click a run right here. And in doing so, we can see that we get air condition and temperature sensor, and then air condition temperature sensor. So both of these ways are going to work. Now what we want to do is remove these again so they're not hard-coded, and then we can write them inside of here. So to do this, we're going to remove some lines of our code. We are going to keep this one right here because we want to initialize the application context still. So we pass in our application file. So we pass in the XML file to our class path, XML. We use our application context, and we have app context right here. We again could use bean factory, but we're going to use the application context. Now, let's say we want to pass in a fridge and a dishwasher. Well, we should make two instances of this, right? So we have our first IoT myDeviceBean dot set is equal to, we have a IoT device, and then we get our bean right here. So now how do we get our second one? Well, first thing that we should do is probably change this name. So we have myDeviceBean. We'll call this 1, and we can just comment all of this out. And we'll comment this one out as well. And we have these two different instances right here, but not really. We'll go over that in a second. So we have our IoT myDeviceBean. This is what we're going to get. And then we should also pass in our IoT device, and then we're going to have dot class. And that's just from the video that they're passing this in. And then what we want to do is set the device. So we have my device bean, that's the first one. We could do dot set device, and this device we want to set it as a fridge. Now what about the description? Well, we have my device bean dot set description, and we can just say this is a fridge. And now let's do the same thing, but for our my device bean 1. So come down here, we're going to change this to 1, change this to 1, and we can say that this is a washer, and then we can say this is washing. So those are the two things that we're going to have. Now let's try to run this. So we're going to run here, it's going to refresh, and then we can see that we're actually not printing anything out. So we're going to have a sysout print line here. So we're going to do a system.out.println where we have our first bean. Inside of here we want to get our first bean. So we're going to do a append, so the plus, and then my device bean. This is just going to call our public right here, public string, toString right here. And then we're going to do the same thing for our second one. So we can put second bean right here, and this should be changed to second, and then this should be my device bean, and then 1. So let's try to print this out now that we have our system out.printlines. And in printing this out, we can see that they are both washing. Well, why is that? Even though we made two different instances, it still refers to the same bean, as we only have included a single instance of a bean in our XML file. So this is just going to override what we have here. It's not going to store. Our lines on 18 and 19 have been initialized, yes, but they're both using the same bean. Let's try to remove this class right here and see what happens. We can see that doesn't really do anything. I'm not 100% sure why this is included in the video, as we just see that it works fine. It seems to work fine both ways, but this is going to be here. This has no effect on it. But again, we have this overwritten, so how do we fix that? Well, in our application context, we have to fix this because this is calling from our app context right here. We have the app context.getBean. We have to have more than one bean inside of here. So if we're working with multiple instances, we're going to want to replace what we have here with this. So we have our my IoT device bean, and it's from our Skillsoft.IoT device. The com.skillsoft is just going to be from our project, where we have our package. We can see in our Java project we have com.skillsoft, and then we have our IoT device. So we have the dot separating them. That way we can get the class from the package. And we have this on the second one as well. The only difference is that this bean name is my IoT device bean 2. So we are referencing the same ID, and if we wanted to, we could have this bean ID instead of our class right here, but we can either reference the class or the bean ID. So it's going to reference the same bean ID, but just have a different name. So it's going to be two separate beans. So we have my IoT device bean 2. We set the ID and point it to the class because we're dealing with pointers right here. The only reason why this is not working is because they point to the same bean. They use the same bean here. This was from the video, my IoT device bean 2. So to change it to what we want, instead of having it to be 2, we are going to have it as 1 right here. We are going to get the bean from here. So we have to get this bean. So we have to make this bean the same name, my IoT device bean 1. We're going to have my IoT device bean, and this should be 1 right here. So now this should all work because we have the correct naming for everything. We fixed this name, we have this name, and we have it down here as well. So this name is the same as these two and this one. This is the only one that we need to fix, my IoT device bean 1, and then we have to have this as my IoT device bean 1. We could have it as 2, but then this one need to be 2 as well. And then we could see that this fixes it. We have our fridge, our washer, and the descriptions are different as well. So that's how we would go about loading beans with our application context.